Terrorism experts have been warning for years that domestic white extremist groups pose a larger threat to U.S. Homeland Security than pretty much any other peril, including foreign terror groups. It's a fact that's often ignored, especially by this administration, but a thwarted attack on the life of a prominent government official this week once again reminded us of this harsh reality. 13 men are now facing state and federal charges for their roles in an alleged plot to kidnap and potentially murder this woman, Gretchen Whitmer, the governor of Michigan. These men, all of them white, are involved in paramilitary militias, and several of them have histories of anti-government organizing. A report by NBC News details the suspects' specific ties to the fringe Boogaloo movement, which believes another civil war is afoot and commits violence against police, as well as the newer Michigan-based militia called the Wolverine Watchmen. When this jaw-dropping headline crossed on Thursday, no one could believe it, but it stands as a stark reminder that here in the United States, we have a distinct problem, a problem with extremist anti-government groups who are armed to the teeth. The plot against Governor Whitmer comes the same week that Trump's own Homeland Security Department released its latest report on threats to the United States. And unsurprisingly to anyone who has been paying attention, the report said, quote, white supremacist extremists will remain the most persistent and lethal threat in the homeland. With me now, Malcolm Nance. He's an MSNBC terrorism analyst and author of the book, The Plot to Betray America, How Team Trump Embraced Our Enemies, Compromised Our Security, and How We Can Fix It. Malcolm, here's problem number one. We need to call this thing by its name, right? Donald Trump campaigned about how you got to call radical Islamic terrorism by its name. We need to call this by its name. It seems quaint that we have these militias, these sort of bands of guys with guns, sort of clubby and all this stuff, but that's not what it is at all. They are anti-government armed bands of people across America. In Syria, we would call that ISIS. In Afghanistan, we would call that Al-Qaeda. That's what these people are.
You know, for a very long time, they were referred to in the extreme as right-wing extremists, armed gunmen, militia groups. But technically, amongst the counterterrorism world, they are domestic or American terrorists. There is no difference between an Islamic extremist terrorist and a West German terrorist or, former communist terrorist versus an American. They carry out acts of violence and plan to commit acts of violence of a political basis intending to influence an audience beyond the immediate victims. They operate within an ideology. What makes the American terrorist, which goes back a long way. By the way, the reason we're talking about them as anti-government is because the Ku Klux Klan was in government for a very long time. And it was only when they had their power taken away from them that these groups started to crop up every 5-10 years and start going after the government that they feel was slighted them. But they are terrorists, and they operate as terrorist cells in terrorist organizations with a radicalized ideology.
And it should be clear that while in many states the idea that they carry guns and sort of operate in groups is not inherently illegal, but there is no law enforcement role for them. There is no role for them to be doing anything that they think is protecting society. That is for law enforcement itself or the National Guard if activated by their governor. All 50 states say that they can't be involved in whether it's poll watching like Donald Trump says or other law enforcement activities that they think they're involved in, or protecting small business like Kyle Rittenhouse thought he was doing in Kenosha. That is not a legal role for armed Americans, whether or not they belong to a so-called militia or not.
No, and what we're talking about is paramilitary vigilantism, also known as armed insurgents. And that's what we're fighting in Iraq and Afghanistan. The only thing is they started out in these small groups in the legal capacity, gun clubs, just guys down at the range talking in the same philosophy. Where they start swaying into terrorism is about the intent of what they want to do. They wanted in Michigan to not just take Governor Whitmer. They intended to kill her. They were going to put her on trial for treason, and the ultimate trial event is execution. They intended to have a government uprising, just like Timothy McVeigh, when he blew up the Murrah building. He expected every white police officer and soldier in the United States to start mass murdering blacks. These people live in a fantasy world, and what they're going to find out is that law enforcement, the National Guard, the military, they are not on their side, even though they have, a sheriff here or a sheriff there who is corrupt or believes in that ideology. But they're going to find out very, very quickly that the law, when applied properly and evenly amongst all Americans, has a dim view of this.
So let's take a look at a chart from the Southern Poverty Law Center about the increase in anti-government groups in the last little while. You can see under President Clinton, they actually declined. Under President George Bush, it was quite low. And then look at that. Barack Obama comes into office, and they hit levels they have never seen before. Interestingly, when Donald Trump comes into office, the anti-government people don't hate the government all that much. These are mostly, not mostly, they're all white groups, and they're men. Gretchen Whitmer, as governor of Michigan, did not impose any restrictions for COVID that were more than Andrew Cuomo did in New York or lots of other governors who were men. There's a misogynist and racist strain to this whole thing.
Well, what there is there's an ideological strain to this, and these people were radicalized by the very fact that a black man could sit in the Oval Office, that he could be president of the United States. And as it escalated, as you look at your chart, they started to have this great fear, peaking at Newtown, when there was the mass murder of the 26 children and teachers in Newtown. The whole thing was, they're coming to take our guns. There were terrorist acts. 3 SWAT officers in Pittsburgh were murdered because Glenn Beck was shouting on TV that they were coming to take your guns after the Newtown massacre. Barack Obama was seen as this evil black Hitler who was going to do that. You can see it taper off as they started to become confident that Trump was going to become president. Where they are now is they believe they are in a state of readiness to support Donald Trump. He is their al-Baghdadi. And this particular strain of vanilla ISIS, if you want to call it that, they are arming themselves. I'm a gun owner. I have seen these people. I have met these people, and they are not doing it for recreation. They intend to feel that they're going to be in some sort of, Wolverines-esque type of insurgency against a government that comes in that might be the Biden administration.
Vanilla ISIS. Malcolm Nance, thank you, sir. Malcolm is an MSNBC terrorism analyst and the author of The Plot to Betray America, How Team Trump Embraced Our Enemies, Compromised Our Security, and How We Can Fix It. Thank you, Malcolm. Still ahead, the latest reporting from NBC News on the Trump administration's family separations at the border. Who was the driving force behind that policy, and how the administration followed through with it, despite knowing that migrant children may never find their way back to their moms and dads.